You're listening to the official podcast of the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities with your host, Nate Turner.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Ohio DODD podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Turner, and today I am so very delighted to be joined by my good friend Renee Wood. We'll talk everything from the importance of inclusive language to the independent living movement and what life was like before the Americans with Disabilities Act. Hi Renee, thank you so much for joining us for our very first video podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nate. It's great to be here.
It's my honor and privilege and pleasure to have you. And I want to start our conversation the way that I start many of my podcasts. I want to give you the chance to introduce yourself to our listeners and talk about your connection to the disabilities community.
Well, my name is Renee Wood. I live in City, Ohio, where I have lived all my life. I guess I should say that I've done everything would be an understatement.
You have done almost everything.
But what I mean by that I've led many committees. I was the first governor appointed chair of with someone with a disability to chair the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council, which is a state council that had a big budget. That was a unique experience. I've also chaired the Ohio Officer Task Force for 7 years, which was a grassroots effort to help people stay in the community and get the resources they need to do that. I've done so many things. That's my professional life.
And you studied at the University of Toledo and you've got a degree in creative writing, right?
Yeah, I would forget to mention that because that was ages ago. And you know how old I am.
You're, roughly 65 years young?
Yeah, well, yeah, quite young, but yeah.
I don't know, you're one of the funnest 65-year-olds I know, and incidentally, we're recording this on my birthday, and I can't think of a better person to spend my birthday with. But yes, you're one of the most intuitive people I know, and I've known you for quite a long time, and just to set the scene, we are recording this podcast at the Ability Center of Greater Toledo, which is a center for independent living. I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about what the Ability Center means to you and how things have changed and the independent living movement has changed before and after the Americans with Disabilities Act?
I would love to talk about that because the Ability Center has been in my life since before it was an independent living center. And I can safely say when they started the adult part of what was known then as Toledo Society for the handicapped, even though they did not know what the independent living movement was back then. They always had the spirit of independent living. Ever since I was a teenager, they always treated us like we were equals, like we were responsible for our own lives. And I think that really helped me as a teenager to understand that yes, indeed, I can do whatever I want. It wasn't just people telling me I could do whatever I want, but people actually believing in me and showing me there's a different nuance by saying, oh, you can do whatever you want, and somebody actually supporting you in doing that. And that was my young years at the very, and it was very informal. We did a lot of recreational stuff, and you didn't know what was happening in the background. It seemed like all fun and games, but it really wasn't. You were really naturally learning and growing and becoming a part disabled adult.
And the Ability Center was a nonprofit organization and is still a nonprofit organization that exists outside of the service system. And I don't know, what your experiences have been like with the DD service system, or if you want to reflect on how your experiences with the Ability Center have helped you to advocate for yourself or navigate systems and get to where you are today. Because pre-ADA, we didn't have a lot of waivers or a lot of services. I mean, the county board system began in the 1960s, but it was for a specific group of people. And I'm curious, as you talk about maturing as a young adult, how you learn to advocate for yourself and navigate life when services and supports weren't so abundant.
Well, there's a lot to that question, Nate.
I know. I'm sorry.
I could, no, it's okay, it's just that I could write a book about what you just asked. Because, like you said, in the 1960s, the county board and DD were just getting started up. However, it was a different diagnosis. It was not DD, it was people with cognitive disabilities back then. And because it was cognitive disabilities, and I did not have a cognitive disability, my parents avoided that whole system. It wasn't even relevant because I didn't have that diagnosis. So we had to go into another service system, which is now OOD. At the time, it was vocational rehabilitation. And I did a lot of stuff through them as far as building my skills to get a job and that stuff. You asked me about the DD system itself. I've been lucky myself with the DD system because I did not get involved with them until I was 42 years old. I didn't even know I had a developmental disability until the age of 40. On my paperwork as a child, it said I had an orthopedic disability. It says nothing about developmental disability, so that was not even in my vocabulary at the time. So when I came into the system at age 40, I had already lived a life of self-determination. I didn't use the word because that was not in my vocabulary either. I just lived my life the best I could. And people often ask me, how in the world did you live on your own? Well, when you don't got a job and you're only going to school part-time, you have all that time to figure out how to wash your own floor, how to vacuum your own carpet. I used to get on my hands and knees and vacuum my own carpet. You might say, wow, Renee, that has really changed. But it worked out. And I don't think we give young people today the chance to figure out stuff on their own, We come in, we take over. If they can't do it the first time, or you can't do it, let me do it for you. Instead of giving them the time to work it out. So when I came into the system, I had all these skills I brought with me. So my first SLA, he said, Renee here, you write your own ISP, you're capable. I'm not writing it for you. And I thought they were great. I still think that's great.
That is incredible. I'm glad you had that opportunity. And I know that navigating the ISP process can be a different experience for folks who have predominantly physical and developmental disabilities because, but even when we think about the ISP process, it can be very eligibility specific and something that people living with disabilities have to do sometimes to access funding. And I know that you have written about that several times in your blog called Renee's Ramblings. And I want to talk a little bit about why you decided to write your blog. I mean, obviously, you have great skills as a writer. You've got a degree in creative writing and you write regularly. But why did you decide to write your blog? And then we could pivot to a recent blog that you wrote where you talk about the importance of inclusive language, but how using certain terms can potentially do harm in the disability community.
Why did I start writing my blog? Because I wanted to create trouble. No.
Good trouble. Absolutely good
true.
trouble.
That's not true. I guess I started because it's a way of expressing myself. And I wanted to get the message out there that we are not treating people with DD like regular people, like typical people. We don't even treat people with DD like the other disability community, what we call the big D community. For some reason, people with DD are so different from everybody else that they gotta have their own. Yes, I will say it. They gotta have their own segregated system of services. By writing my blog, I really emphasize that, I guess. Maybe too much. Maybe people don't like it. I don't know.
I think you emphasize it just the right amount. You take a lot of what people are feeling and what people experience and put it onto paper to really have a unique and somewhere between slightly and very critical view of our supports array as we have it. And it's a very important perspective. What are some of the best ways people with disabilities can kind of talk about it and communicate the uniqueness and richness of our lived experiences to people who might perceive what we can do or make assumptions about what we're capable of?
When parents see the child with a disability made fun of, that hurts their heart in a special way. And I can't take that pain away. That's a real experience. That is their experience. And I get that. But that child who is being made fun of experiences it in their own way. They're two different experiences, and the child might take that experience and grow from it, whereas the parent had nothing to do with it. The parent's experience has always made me want to hurt and frustration when the child is growing and developing. So how can you teach somebody that they have potential when they always see them as a victim of something? We're all victims. When you're non-disabled, you might be bullied because you have a big nose or something. You know, there's always going to be bad experiences in life. So, our potential is there. It's just masked in a body that works differently, or in a mind that works differently. But there's still, how many people grow up to be doctors and lawyers and Stephen Hawking? Not too many Stephen Hawking roaming around the world. So if we always think of people with disabilities as having to meet that person that's non-disabled, we're looking at the wrong thing, because they each have equal potential. They just do it differently.
And I absolutely agree with you. I think people living with disabilities are capable of doing great things. You know, we may need support and it may look a little bit different at times, but we are capable of fully pursuing the things that we want to do and living our lives. And so, what if they're different from everybody else's?
That don't mean we don't accomplish the same kind of thing. We just do it in a different way. We might need a little bit of support in doing it. For example, I can hold, well, not at 65, but when I was younger, I could hold a full-time job. The only thing I need is somebody to show up at noon to feed me lunch and help me to the bathroom. That's all I needed, and the rest of the day, I'm good on my own.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of supports that happen organically in the workplace where people naturally help each other out, and it isn't even seen as support, it's just the way things operate.
We used to allow other students to help out people with disabilities. Like someone helped me eat. Someone would actually feed me just another student, yeah. And we don't do that no more. So we always put out a goal with a student with a disability. What if you're 16 years old and you're in a wheelchair and you want to go hang out with your friends? Maybe you smoke a cigarette, I don't know. That's probably not a good thing to do, but that's what teenagers do, right?
Yeah, sure.
If you got an adult hanging on your arm all the time, how many friends are you gonna make? You know, it's okay to have someone there to help you out when you need it, but when you don't need it, they need to let you be on your own so you can create your own boundaries, so you know how to navigate with other people your age. It starts out with when you're young, and you can't do it with somebody by your side all the time.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense to you?
It does, and when I reflect on my own experience, at least I know by the time I was studying at Wright State University, the Office of Disability Services would hire a lot of folks with disabilities to help with note taking and test taking, and at Wright State they obviously have the PA station where there's an attendant to help people use the restroom, but then also there would be folks in the dining hall, and they provide assistance there. So it was a real commitment to using the disability community and allowing us to have those resources to build our own connections and supports. I think that is really lacking in society as a whole. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and it reminded me of something else that I wanted to get your take on. I know you have also written extensively about what it means to pass in the disability community and the divide that exists between people who have predominantly physical disabilities and people who have predominantly cognitive disabilities, and how we perceive ourselves and how society perceives us. And I know you've written, and I think quite accurately in my opinion, how that divide does nothing but hold the disability community back.
Yeah, two different issues there. Let's start with passing. I hate to say this, it disgusts me about myself, but I'm not trying to justify it. But the reality was that I was already different, okay? Because of my physical disability, I was already different. And my mom and my family and all the adults in my life would say how smart I was. That was like my badge of honor. You're not like them. You're not like people who are cognitive disabled. You're smart. So it was ingrained in my mind that somehow that was better. Even though it's not better, it's different. But in my young life, it was, so I used to not want to associate with people who were cognitively disabled because they were so much different than I was. I thought, because they talk different than me. And I realized that at some point I was trying to pass for something better than I was. And passing means you're trying to fit into non-disabled world. You're trying to come as close to that ideal as possible. So you leave all this stuff behind and try to emulate as much as you can a typical person because you're so afraid that people will associate you with those people. So that's the way I think about cognitively disabled people. I don't mind hanging out with them. I don't mind working with them. They can be some of my best friends. I am not cognitively disabled. I have different needs than them. That sounds terrible.
It doesn't. And I think there might be opportunities for needs organically to balance themselves out. If you're living with somebody with a cognitive disability, you might be able to help them with med reminders and balancing a checkbook and, maintaining the home. And they may be able to help you with physical needs. So there can be some benefit, but we don't want to just assume that people living with disabilities want to live together.
Oh, it's okay to live with them, but you still need that cognitive stimulation that they may not be able to give you.
Absolutely. And I think, I think everyone benefits from diverse relationships so that we can learn what we have in common, but also learn to embrace differences as well.
Yeah, I guess my point was you can't put everybody together because they look alike when they're not alike. Everybody's different.
I really do think, unquestionably, you have maximized the incredible gifts that you have, and you continue to educate people every day. And there's just a lot of power behind the resilience of a lot of people with disabilities, and that we never give up. We might have to do things differently, but we can make things happen. And I know we're kind of maybe running a little bit short on time, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the importance of living with disabilities and having leadership opportunities. I know that you were instrumental in promoting the changes in governance around county boards, and it's one of the reasons why I was brought to the department to help support people at county boards in making this happen. But do you want to reflect on the value that people living with developmental disabilities bring to the system, and just how important the initiative is for our system to progress and truly work to enhance the people that it supports?
I want to say that I started this pursuit of getting people on county boards about 12 or 13 years ago. And at that time, we got so much pushback from the system. But I kept talking about what it means to have people with developmental disabilities on board. I mean, these are the boards that govern our local policy on how people with developmental disabilities should be served. And they don't got a voice on that board. And I used to get in trouble when I called it dictation without representation. Because that's exactly how it felt. Was like we didn't get no say. There was nobody that looked like us on the county board, and yet they're making all these policies and rules, and we don't even get a voting voice. And I think by talking about that through the years, it finally a light bulb went off and said, well, yeah, of course, that does make sense. So they finally got it. It took a while, but I'm so happy for the future generation. And I am worried too, because we need to get people interested in being on county boards. It's not easy to be a board member. It's not fun. It's not pretty. It's work.
Don't I know it? Absolutely. It is work, and I know that you've also expressed at least some concern about the level of involvement with the current generation of people living with disabilities, because we're in a post-ADA world and we've achieved a measure of equality and we have the supports. Maybe this generation think that the work is done, or that advocacy doesn't need to happen.
I was thinking about that question for that couple of days about pre-ADA, because I was born way before ADA. And you know what, Nate? I did not know until I was 23 years old that I did not have any civil rights. It never dawned on me. I was going to college, I was living my life, I went to movies, I went to the store, I went wherever I pleased. But you know, I went into a bar one night with my girlfriend, who also had a disability. She walked on crutches, and the owner stopped us at the door and said, "I don't want you in here." And we said, "What?" And he showed us the door and said that we were a liability. So we called the police and said, "Look, we're not drunk, we didn't even have a beer yet, Can you kick us out?" And somehow, it must have been the ability center that told us we actually had no civil rights. We were not covered under the Civil Rights Bill. And I'm like, what? And it wasn't until 1991 that we had civil rights. So you can be kicked out anywhere, anytime, and you didn't have any recourse at all. But my point with the generation today is that they're just living their life. They don't understand yet. It hasn't hit them yet what this all means, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to grow up during the ADA generation, but I think because of, the disability mecca that we have in Ohio, I was educated in disability history. I knew the impact. And, that's just one of the many pieces of value that the SILs bring is telling the disability history and recounting it because memories do fade and leaders do pass away over time. And we need to remember that history and where we came from and why it's important.
Yeah, we could do that at any time. I mean, our civil rights bill, I don't know why they don't incorporate into the bigger civil rights bill. Because they could do away with the ADA at any time, or parts of it at least. And I don't think people understand how vulnerable that legislation is, especially under the current political climate in America.
Thank you so much for your time. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in and hearing your testimony. I want to encourage everyone to subscribe to our newsletters, especially Disability Connection. And that's all we have this time. Thank you so much for joining us for the Ohio DODD podcast. Stay informed, stay connected, stay empowered. Talk to you all next time.
You have just listened to another episode of the official podcast of the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share with others. For more news and information from the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities, please visit dodd.ohio.gov. You may also subscribe to our publications and follow DODD on all social media platforms. Thank you for listening.